Hello, I'm Roger Smith. Welcome to Books and the World, a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center. Books and the World is produced over the Cape Cod Community Access Channel to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other media of communication. The Writers Center was established 60 years ago and sponsors a 4-day conference each summer. Books and the World has been broadcasting continuously for 40 years. Today, we are delighted to welcome Lee Roscoe, author of Wampanoag, Art for the Ages. Lee is a longtime Massachusetts journalist, environmental educator, and activist with decades-long interest in Indigenous and Wampanoag culture and history. Her passion for creativity pushes her in many directions, from playwriting to film to fashion to this very important book. Lee, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Roger, for having me, and thanks to the Cape Cod Writers Center.
Lee, there's a lot to talk about today, but let's start with your background. Who is Lee Roscoe and what got you to this point?
Well, I started out in theater and as a playwright, and then I abandoned that to create the first modular multi-wrap clothing in the U.S. And then my journey took me to an interest in things indigenous that started decades ago when I began to write a play about Tisquantum. My father had given me a book by John Bonifanti about King Philip's War and other aspects of Wampanoag culture. And there's a certain mystery and sense of the sacred in theater when you're on stage, and there's a mystery about things indigenous that compelled me to start to self-educate. So I would go to the New York Public Library and read absolutely everything I could, journals of American folklore, all the anthropological bulletins I could get my hands on, anthropologists, left, right, and backwards, to try to educate myself about things indigenous, and it became a lifelong passion. And when I came to the Cape and started teaching environmental ed, I always would acknowledge, and this was long before it was a thing to do, I would always start my classes with who is here, who was here. Excellent. First. And through the years, I started to learn from people like Chief Earl Mills. I became a journalist. I practiced journalism for a long time, kind of in conjunction with teaching environmental ed. And through that, I was able to explore indigenous knowledge by writing articles, for instance, some for the Journal of the Genealogical, I never get their name right, forgive me, David, but the Cape Cod Genealogical Society journal, and I interviewed 4 tribal elders for that. And I've done a number of articles through the years on things Wampanoag, and that made me realize that this incredible culture, which is 10 to 12,000 years old, their arts and the relationship between the arts and the lifeway hadn't really been explored. So I did a piece for the late Chris Busa for Provincetown Arts Magazine on the language reclamation project, Jesse Little-Daubert's phenomenal project. Phenomenal. And I had, great access there. I was involved for years with activism on behalf of the tribe, helping to collect 2,500 signatures over the course of 2 years in favor of federal recognition when there was a good deal of prejudice against it. Things like helping to spearhead CUSP, Keep Untamed Santuit Pond. We saved 300 acres of land in the Santuit Marston's Mills Cotuit area, spearheaded by the late Jim Gould. And on that land is an area that is sacred to the tribe. And so involvements with things like that, with the journalism, with the activism, I think led to enough trust to give me the privilege of access so that I could do the first piece for Provincetown Arts Magazine, not only on the language program, but on the arts. That then expanded into a very large manuscript. I had a lot of information from a lot of artisans. And I was lucky enough. Is this too much? Is this okay?
Well, we're moving into the book, so
Yeah.
my question is going to be, this is obviously a labor of love, and therefore this book stemmed from obviously your history and involvement with the Wampanoags, and so what brought you over the threshold? What got you to the point where you said, okay, I'm really going to do this?
Well, I had collected so much information from the artisans who are in the book that it was a manuscript. And Tom Ryan, who was the organizer of the Eastham 400th, which was part of an adjunct to the Plymouth 400th, and that was a commemoration of first contact, which wasn't really first contact, as any Wampanoag will tell you. There had been plenty of contact, but when the separatists came to Plymouth, it was a commemoration of the intruders coming into Wampanoag land. So Tom had done a series of videos, asked me to do one on the arts, and I told him that I had a full manuscript. He said, I'll take a look at it, and he said, I will produce it. So
Whoa.
I am extremely grateful to Tom Ryan. Tom, if you're listening. And he created Coyote Press, and we worked on the book off and on for 4 years. It's been 4 years from writing it, having 3 tribal elders vet it to make sure that there's nothing incorrect in the book or that I'm not revealing things that should not be revealed. Designing the book, which I did with backup from Paraclete Press, and then at last having 3 people edit it, and you know the process.
Absolutely.
And then finally printing it and starting to get it out there to the bookstores on the Cape, historical societies, museums, not just on the Cape, but also all over New England, and hopefully soon, hopefully at an important museum in New York.
Well, this is fascinating, and you set the stage real early on in your initial chapters, and I want to just start out with a couple of things. 1492 is a date we're all familiar with, and also 1620, the alleged first contact that you referred to. But somewhere between those 2 dates, 1492 and 1620, disease from the Europeans spread throughout the east coast of the United States. Well, obviously not the United States, but North America. I want you to paint a picture to the best you can. What was indigenous culture like before the disease hit? We talk about this flourishing culture. So what was it?
Well, this is something that you would have to ask a Wampanoag. And I want to stress that I am not Wampanoag and I am not indigenous. And my intention is in the book to build a bridge to allow the Wampanoag to speak for themselves, because there's been too much imposition of Euro-Americans speaking for them. And so in the book, the artisans, I'm just a channel through which they discuss how they do their art and why they do their art. So my understanding from watching Paula Peters' fantastic videos, from all the reading that I've done, and from listening to tribal members, is that it was an extremely flourishing, beautiful, inclusive, self-sufficient society in which You would self-provision with your hands and body in season, always taking care of the other. It was never about the self. It was communal. And when I say was, all of these values are still flourishing amongst indigenous people, not just the Wampanoag today, and many of the traditionalists. So that the self-provisioning from nature was a first-hand way of existence, which is something that drew me to them, because I have always wanted to live a self-sufficient, a primary sufficiency life, self-build the house, grow the vegetables, hunt, fish, provide. And I think, that was how they had to exist. There were no supermarkets. And there was cultural cohesiveness, as I understand it, amongst Algonquian-speaking tribes. And they inhabited the East Coast all the way from the southeast up through Canada and into a little bit of Canada heading towards the Plains tribes. Such people as the Anishinaabe and the Lenape and the Micmac and the Passamaquoddy and so forth. So there was visiting back and forth. There were sophisticated trade networks. There was an incredibly sophisticated language and oral tradition. And we talk about these tribes being pre-literate, but that's not really true, because they had mnemonic devices. They had an oral tradition where wampum keepers or history keepers would keep that tradition of the history and the belief systems and pass it down. And you can see in the language, I can't study the language as an outsider, but I did do on my own, I looked at some etymology of ancient dictionaries that you can get your hands on and compare them to some of the belief figures. And just as an outsider looking in, there's terrific sophistication in that language. And if you look at indigenous languages like the Plains Indians, like the Lakota, I was able to study a little bit of Lakota, and their whole construct of language is action-oriented. It's more like horse rode I on, rather than I rode on a horse.
Interesting. Yeah.
And a lot of, and as Jesse Littledore would tell you, a lot of the philosophy comes through the language. Well, I'm digressing from your question. Forgive me.
No, you're doing great, and obviously you're very passionate about all of this.
I wish I had lived 500 years ago before contact. I think it would have been a fantastically beautiful life way.
Well, that's a
listening
good way
to stories in the wee two at night, and having the clan mothers.
Well, you did mention the Wetu, and I would like to get to that, because that's how you started your book, with the Wetu.
Right.
And that was obviously a decision on your part. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to start the book in the home, where the arts begin. I want to say, and I usually read this, and I'm not sure that, and I think I will, because I can never get it quite right, but I really, for the Wampanoag, as with all indigenous cultures of Turtle Island, art is not separated from life, nor spirit from material. There is none of the Judeo-Christian ethic of dominance over the earth, our Western concepts. Rather, everything has spirit, is alive, and man's no better and no worse than everything in nature: rock, sky, stars, animals, four-leggeds, wingeds. And art results from supplying needs, as I said, in season. It wasn't created to hang on a wall without a use, but an integral part of providing the basics of food, of shelter, clothing, entertainment, and importantly, of ceremony. So when you talk about the Wetu, it is a shelter that has spiritual significance in almost every part of it. And within the Wetu are the other arts of living, all of which have both a material and a spiritual component to them. So I decided to start with the Wetu.
Well, that's brilliant. And it's what's very evident is that woven throughout this entire book is the combination or the melding of utility as well as ceremonial, sacred, and that tells so much about this culture. Can you give us any examples of that from?
Well, I can, as Anna Juan Whedon told me. And by the way, I want to say that I haven't revealed anything of the sacred that traditionalists do not want revealed, because you know, there is that thin line of cultural appropriation, and I really wanted to walk it very, very carefully. So anything in there I've been allowed to repeat. So Anna Juan Whedon, for instance, talks about collecting the cedar saplings in spring with which the Witu is built because they're more flexible then, but putting them in the ground with tobacco and with prayer, because where the wood connects with the earth is a sacred duality. There's a kind of male and femaleness to that. And every art that the Wampanoag practice, there is that duality. There's other aspects to the Witu which combine the material and the spiritual. Marcus Hendricks, for instance, talks about, he gives a lot of wonderful walks if you ever have a chance to go on them. They're just terrific. He's a history keeper, and he talks about the Witu also signifying the womb. And there may be a connection in the language between Witu and womb. There are different types of Witus. There is the summer Witu, which is set by the coast, and there is the longhouse or winter Witu. At this time at the fall, during the fall, people would be moving inland for the winter into the longhouses, the larger, the 3 and 4 fire Witus, the Nush Witus. And forgive me, please, if I'm mispronouncing in any way. And all the Witus, as I understand it, were not controlled by, because that's a Western construct, but they were in the domain of women. The society is matrilineal and matriarchal, which I love, and so the home site was a female place. And indeed, Anita Peters, Mother Bear, had told me that it was the clan mother who was in charge of the winter Witus for the particular clans in the Wampanoag society.
Well, that's phenomenal, and I want to interrupt things just for a moment and comment on the deference that you are constantly paying to the folks who were so kind to impart their wisdom to you, and you very clearly in the book as well as in this interview, you don't want to speak for them. You want them to speak for themselves, and this is I have to admire your deference to this.
Thank you. I mean, it's critical. They are our hosts upon the land. In a sense, we would not be here if it were not for, in our area on Cape Cod, for the Wampanoag. So we owe them, it makes me cry, you know, we owe them tremendous respect. And, you know, to have had the privilege or have the privilege of being able to garner information from any tribal member, you need to do it with love and respect.
Good.
Period. I mean, I even feel guilty in a way that I wrote the book, but, you know, in a way, there's a positive thing about having an outsider write a book like this, because it can build a bridge between cultures. Because of my interest for so many decades, I think I knew the right questions to ask. And the outside-inside bridge, as I say, I think is important. It's, you know, there's a little bit of objectivity, of bringing a different viewpoint to the questions that you're going to ask that might end up with a very positive result. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Let me let me quote Anna Van Whedon from your book. You say, "Anytime we take life, we do a ceremony. We even offer tobacco to our crops. You can't expect nature just to produce without giving back." What does that tell you about the Wampanoag?
That tells me about what they always talk about, which is reciprocity. If there seems to be one ethic that is paramount, and there are many, but that is one, reciprocity between human beings and the earth, between human beings and creatures on the earth. For instance, Ramona Peters, Nosepoket, who is a revered elder, who is a potter, who is in the book, who was a tribal historic preservation officer, talked to me at one point about how there were treaties of reciprocity between human beings and whales, so that the whales would give themselves to the people, and the people would treat the whales with the respect that the whales deserved. So there's always an aspect of deference, of respect, of caring, of a lack of ego. And I want to interject one of the reasons, I don't know if I mentioned this before, you forget what you say in rehearsal, but I'll say it again if I'm repeating myself. One of the reasons that I'm so enamored of things indigenous is that I had, when I was in New York, I had a number of my best girlfriends one was Kiowa, one was Iowa. One of my best girlfriends who's a scientist at Woods Hole here on the Cape is Winnebago, Ho-Chunk. And I just found these women to be so embracing and warm. And they were not, these were not, I am Native. They just happened to be, it was their heritage, but they weren't expressing it as a dominant factor in the way they lived their lives. But they were so, they lacked jealousy and competitiveness, and were so embracing. It seemed to be so much more highly evolved than our own culture. So that's one of the reasons I fell in love with things indigenous.
I get it. Well, look at one of the, to move on, there's many words that you use in your book that are quite poetic, and I would like to read from page 22 of the book. You say, "The energy and prayers of the makers go into the sash or the belt for protection of the wearer. The weaving has continuity for it may be passed down to generations. The fringe on the ends of the belt or sash, or indeed, Lopez says, any garment, may both sweep the ground, making contact with the earth, and moving with the air, bringing prayer up to the Creator."
So I think it's beautiful. I'm quoting Marlene Lopez. She's a finger weaver, and that is her. That is not me. She is making that statement about a finger woven sash. So there are a lot of arts in the book, of which that is one. Finger weaving is a very ancient craft. I guess as long as there have been human beings, they've been doing finger weaving, which is basically using fiber, working it, processing it, and without a loom, interweaving it so that you can create a sash or a tumpline or so forth. That's one of the arts that's in the book that Julia Marden talks about at length. Can I mention some of the other arts that are,
Please do.
that are in the book?
We're less than 4 minutes, so you.
Oh my God!
Time
All right.
flies when you're having fun.
Oh my goodness! So there is inside the weedu there is matting, and that's also an ancient and interesting technique. There's matting inside. There's matting outside. Cattail outside. Bulrush inside. Helps to keep the weedu warm and dry, takes the rain off. Julia Marden talks at length about that. There's twining to create storage bags. She is a master twiner. Her artifacts are in museums. That's in the book. And there's, importantly, pottery, which Nosepoket has created. And I want to stress that there is also, oh my goodness, only 4 minutes, there's adornment, there's regalia, and there's wampum, and that's a huge section because there's secular wampum and there's sacred wampum. There was wampum that was used to create alliances, that was used to tell history. Oh my goodness, there's just so much to discuss. I can't believe there's only 4 minutes. I want to stress one thing, that all of these people in the book say that they have received wisdom from their ancestors in creating these crafts and arts and bringing them into the present and into the future. And the last part of the book is artists such as Robert Peters and Emma Jo Mills Brennan, who do create a more Western form of art, relying on their sacred traditions to inform their art, and that art is created, beautiful art to hang on a wall. So there is that transition, and there's a transition, for instance, in adornment with Jonathan Perry. He takes from his ancient ancestral forms, creates something spectacularly modern and new, and he'll use old tools and new tools to create. He'll make that bridge between, that synthesis that some of the wampum prophecies actually talk about, between ancient wisdom and the natural world and a soft technology and the use of technology in the modern world.
Well, this you're obviously very passionate about this book and your subject, and let's wrap up with one final thing. Who do you think, who's your target audience for this delightful book?
And anyone and everyone, from children to people who are 103, anyone who's interested in learning about this beautiful culture and their lifeway and the arts within that lifeway. Anyone, all of you.
Well, I have to admit,
please read the book.
as a novice in this subject, I was absolutely fascinated. I think you gave me what I would consider for myself was a brilliant introduction that made me only more curious about this whole subject and the Wampanoag culture in general. So thank you very, very much for spending time with us. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. Thank you.